You're listening or watching the More Than Sunday podcast at the River. I'm Pastor Weston, and today's topic is going to be COVID-19. I've been getting a lot of people asking me if I would just share a little bit more of my own perspective on this, so I'm going to do that right now. And I just want to emphasize these are my personal feelings. I'm not trying to say or imply you have to see things exactly the same way as me, but I do want to just kind of offer you my perspective on it, while we're doing the things we're doing as a church. Let me just give you my points right up front, and then I'll kind of explain them as I go along. Number one, I do think that this SARS-CoV-2, I think is the official name for the virus, is something real. It's something that we should take very seriously. Number two, I do think the dangers of COVID are being inflated. And I do think, number three, that we have responded more out of fear and panic than out of science and wisdom, contrary to many claims. And number four, most may be important for us as a church, I do think we should consider more what the Lord might be saying during this time. So the first point, COVID-19 is real, should be taken serious. Obviously those who get a severe case of it, it's a pretty miserable experience, and a lot of people have died from it. I know there's questions about, the accuracy of the numbers, but I think one thing that's probably not in much question is we've had a lot of people die. And I don't think we should minimize that in any sense at all. And I've seen some really, I think I was reading in the news the other day, there was some young people down south or something having like COVID parties or something, seeing who can get sick first or something. And, that's just stupid. I mean, why would you want to get sick, and why would you want to spread it and get somebody else sick? That just makes no sense to me whatsoever. And there are some things that remain unknown about this virus that I think, are reasons for some caution. I think the origins are a little bit not necessarily clear. I don't mean the geography. I mean whether this truly is a natural thing that mutated, or whether maybe there was an accidental lab release. I don't think that's been firmly determined yet. And obviously we don't know anything about the long-term effects of having COVID. So those are some unknowns that are worth being cautious. And we are taking precautions as a church family. We are keeping our eye on things. We have regular communication with our town and local officials. Certainly, if we were to see a big outbreak in the region, or if we start to see members at the River family test positive, obviously we'll respond and we'll take whatever prudent, appropriate actions we think, make sense. Now, having said all that, I do think that a lot of the known dangers about COVID are being inflated, particularly by some politicians, and the media, I think, is particularly bad. It's like one of the worst places to get information on good information on what is happening. I often hear people talk about 1%, 2%, 3%, 5% fatality rates, and it's 10, 15, 20 times, more deadly than the flu. And listen, that's just not really the case. All of the best data right now is clearly showing much, much lower fatality rates for this. Much closer to the flu, maybe a little bit higher. I think the flu is something like 0.1%, and the best data now, I think, is showing COVID somewhere between 0.05% or maybe as high as 0.4%, depending on the region and the circumstances. And so that's obviously much, much less than a lot of the numbers that have been thrown out there. And even more important, that's an important number, obviously, but even a more, what's really, really helpful is to understand sort of that distribution. And, this was pretty clear early on, and it's really been, I think, pretty well confirmed now by the data that is out there, that it really is most dangerous for those who are really in poor health and have more serious pre-existing health conditions, and of course the elderly. And I think there's actually a correlation there, because obviously as we get older, our immune systems do naturally deteriorate, and it's very common for the elderly to have pre-existing health conditions. And so that's really where the risk is. One of the things that has really bothered me all along since the very beginning is a lot of the panic that has been instilled in parents listen, the risk for kids really is very low. I mean, I'm talking really low, like approaching zero low. It's obviously not zero. There is some risk, but it's extremely low. Actually, much less dangerous and much less risky than the flu itself for kids. All right, and I think I think the latest data is really showing it's like 10 to 20 times less dangerous than influenza, than the flu for children. And listen, honestly, every time you put your kid in the car, you are putting them in more danger than you are in terms of COVID. And so, really, the young and more importantly, the healthy really are at low risk. It's interesting. I actually went to the New York City Health website. They have a bunch of information out there. New York City, of course, was one of the hot spots. Man, did they get hit hard. And I believe they had something around 17,000, this last time I checked, around 17,000 deaths. And the health department actually did a study. They actually, kind of studied those deaths to find out other factors that might be involved. And they were able to actually study, I believe, 15,000 out of the 17,000 deaths. They were able to determine if there was any other factors involved. And they discovered that out of those 15,000, only 100 people did not have pre-existing serious health conditions. 99.3% of those who died after testing positive for COVID or testing positive with COVID, all of them, 99.3% had pre-existing health conditions. So that really does say a lot, and that's really, to me, where the real focus should be in terms of trying to protect the vulnerable. That's where that's where we really want to be particularly cautious. Listen, it seems pretty clear that COVID is highly contagious, which is part of the reason why it really should be taken serious. But when you look at transmission, and this is, there's a lot more information coming out about the way in which it transmits person to person. And it's really coming down to three factors coming together, which is really where it transmits. And that is when you're in close contact indoors for an extended period of time. Extended period of time being like 5-10 minutes or longer than that. And that's really where that transmission takes place. Generally speaking, it doesn't transmit on surfaces. I know it technically can, but generally speaking, it's not where it's happening. Kids are actually does not appear to be big spreaders. Even there seems to be some growing evidence that those who are asymptomatic might not be as big as spreaders as they originally thought. And asymptomatic mean those who do not have any kind of symptoms, nor will they. And it's important here to make a distinction. I think this gets confused a lot, but there actually is an important distinction between asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic. Asymptomatic means you don't have symptoms, nor will you ever have symptoms. Pre-symptomatic means you have been infected, you will show symptoms, but you're not currently showing symptoms. And that tends to be, and that, of course, you are contagious during that time. And anyway, so, that's really the way it transmits. Those are the kind of things where that's why I think, being more careful in terms of, close contact inside for extended periods of time. Now, we need to be honest, as a church, we do have our gatherings. We have limited to the size so we can keep space inside. But church gatherings, obviously, oftentimes fall in that category. We are indoors, and we are together for an extended period of time. And so, when we get really close to each other, that brings those three factors together. And it's worth just, knowing and being cautious. And I do think it's good to, practice trying to make sure we limit how close we are. And anyway, so, I get asked a lot about masks, I don't know, it's just a huge debate, and everybody's got an opinion on that. Everybody's got a scientific study to back up, wearing a mask, not wearing a mask. So listen, here's my quick take on mask and face coverings. I think the science does indicate that wearing a mask in certain situations, potentially reduces transmission. Obviously, the better the mask and the better you are at using it properly, the more effective it will be. There's also, plenty of indication that, there are downsides to wearing a mask. And so my basic conclusion is that, wearing a mask in certain situations makes sense, particularly when we're talking about close contact indoor, extended period of time, and especially if you know that the COVID virus is in an area. If I'm in an area where I know it's kind of much more active, I know it's kind of active everywhere, but you know what I'm talking about. Like it's not just a couple of cases, but it's more active. That's where, it obviously would make more sense. Other than those situations, I would just honestly avoid wearing a mask, wearing it outside, wearing it while you're driving in your car, wearing it when you're keeping distance. Just, it just doesn't make any sense. I don't wear a mask unless I'm asked to and instead I really do my best just to, keep my distance from people unless I know that person doesn't mind being in close contact, and I don't mind being in close contact. And mostly I don't, because I'm just not particularly worried about this virus. So that's kind of my take on that. One of the points I made was I really do feel like a lot of things, especially with the media, a lot more fear and panic. And I've been saying this actually from the very, very beginning, more than science and wisdom. The idea we're following the science is kind of I personally, I just think it's demonstrably a false claim. Fear just rarely leads to good long-term decisions. And, it was very clear to me, especially in the beginning, things were moving so fast. I mean, even as a church, we were literally scrambling day to day, trying to figure out what was doing, because everything was changing so ridiculously fast. We would get a certain communication from officials and stuff, and we started making plans, and by the next day, that whole thing got blown up, and now we got to do something different, and it was just crazy. And really, the thing that set everybody off the edge, whether you're aware of it or not, really was a report that came out of the Imperial College in the UK, projecting that 2.2 or something like that million Americans would die. And man, it went crazy. And of course, that report, that model, there's lots of reasons, and many people did question it from the beginning. And one of the problems was, of course, to use it very exaggerated fatality rates, and of course, the fear and the panic just caused, to in my opinion, just make all kinds of decisions that were very draconian and way over the top, without any kind of real thoughtfulness, without any real consideration for all of the unintended and negative consequences. And we are seeing quite a bit of that. There's many negative consequences from the things that we've done. We went from a booming economy to a economy on the edge of disaster in a very short period of time. I know some people, they hear a comment like that, and they make the accusation, you just care more about money than lives. And honestly, that's just a silly and very immature argument. Obviously some people think of the economy merely as about making money and wealth, but that's a very poor understanding of what the economy really represents. The economy represents much more than that. It represents human interaction, it represents community, it represents human potential and human creativity. Of course, it does include being able to, make a living and provide for you and your family and others, and all of those things are actually, not only are they important, they're actually critical for the well-being and flourishing of humanity. And I don't have time to go off on that rant, but just viewing the economy as about making money and wealth and greed is a major misunderstanding. And I think it did lead to this attitude that says, hey, that's unimportant. What's more important is lives, without any thought for the fact that, no, of course lives are the most important thing, but the economy has a major, huge impact on lives in so many ways, in so many important ways, and you can't just discount that as if it doesn't matter. We are seeing a lot of, in my opinion, the negative effects from our reaction are going to be worse than the virus itself. And the impact on kids has been very detrimental. As a matter of fact, I doubt this even came out in the news, but the American Academy of Pediatrics came out like last week and said that one of our number one goals for the fall has got to be getting the kids back to in-person classes and stuff at school and education. And then they go on to list all kinds of negative effects that they're seeing. And I have seen it in many ways. It's really had a detrimental effect on the kids. I've heard of parents just keeping their kids basically locked down in their homes. And honestly, it's just not healthy. And I don't think it's healthy for people. I think one of the clear negative effects I've seen is just, besides a lot of mental health issues, and I've seen them as a pastor. Okay, I'm telling you, I've seen it. And, there's a reason why God says it's not good for man to be alone, because it's not good for man to be alone, and or woman, anyone. And I've certainly seen people losing the ability and the desire even to really have meaningful relationships and friendships and to get together with people, that is just important. And I'm just honestly I think there's just too many people just getting too comfortable, staying at home and watching TV and just being with your one or two people that you are close to. And listen, honestly, that's just not healthy. And we're not created to do that. That's not your eternal destiny. It's not what you're called to do here. Relationships are important. The church is important. The community is important. Listen, you can see people and be safe. You can do both. It's not an either or. The notion that we have to stop seeing people is stupid. The idea that social distancing somehow means stay in your house and don't see anybody is just plain stupid. I don't know how else to say it. And so it's important that we need to find ways to stay connected, and you can do that and be safe at the same time. My last point was really about let's really take some more time to consider what God might be saying. Now, I don't have a specific word of the Lord for you and for us, but I do just want to offer a couple of thoughts. Okay, number one, the one thing I know is constant. Jesus is always building his church. And there's he's just always doing that. Is if you really want to understand what God is doing on the earth, you really have to look at what God is doing in and to and through the church. There's a great message in Haggai that I think is just as relevant today as it's ever been. And in the book of Haggai, the prophet, he was speaking to the people of God, and basically God's message to them was, listen, you're so busy building your own houses that you are neglecting, my house and what I would like to see done. And the Lord says, listen, you really need to consider what's happening. Like, look around and consider what is happening in your midst. And he said, listen, your wealth is being evaporated, and you're experiencing food in short supply, and you have high expectations for what will happen, and they don't happen, and you end up disappointed and with a lot less than what you thought would happen. And he says, listen, you've neglected my house, and so you're not doing the things that I've wanted you to do, and I'm not giving you what you want. And I don't mean that like in a harsh way, and it wasn't meant, obviously God didn't say it, it wasn't meant with a harsh spirit. It was just, listen, like wake up. God is good. And listen, he has way better things imagined and planned for us than we do. Like, he cares more about us than we do. I mean, we're self-centered, and in our self-centeredness, we can't even see sometimes that God has better things for us than we can even think about or imagine. And God says, but listen, the way into the good things that God has is by putting the things that God cares about first. He knows what he's doing. And so it's just important to have his priorities first. And listen, building this church, I'm not talking about, and you all know, I'm not talking about a building. I'm talking about a people. I'm talking about a community. I'm talking about discipleship. I'm talking about building up the people of God. And I know that many of you are concerned about the virus and coming to gatherings. And I absolutely 100% respect that completely. And there is zero pressure to have to be like part of God. I realize we're in a unique, special time. This is a pandemic, and so it's not, things are not necessarily as they would be normally. But having said that, my encouragement is just do not lose sight of being part of what God is doing. And just because there's a pandemic and just because stuff is happening doesn't mean suddenly God's stay home, stay safe, and he's locked himself up in heaven somewhere and waiting for all this to kind of go. He's doing things. He's moving in the midst of this, and don't stop being part of church in some manner. Okay, I mean, online is obviously a good way, but there's got to be ways to reach out and to connect. We're going to actually offer some outdoor gatherings this summer. I think our first one, I think it's going to be July 19th. It's like a Friday night. It's going to be like a family night. Bring some food, bring some games, bring your chairs, lawn chairs. We're going to set up in the back. We're going to have a great time. You can keep your distance outside. It'll be safe. Wear masks if you feel that will be helpful for you. if you can be part of a small group or start up a small group, if you had one going, maybe get one going, or find ways to do it that are comfortable for you, safe. Just don't let what is happening, create or justify unhealthy habits like being too isolated and not making the time to maintain relationships or to be able to create new ones. The last thing, I just wanted to, this is the time to rise up. This is the time. It's always a time for the church to rise up. That's not like a new prophetic word. I just mean, but when things like this hit, it's just even more of a time for the church. And it's not a time to be fearful. It's not a time just to be thinking about how to protect yourself and preserve what you've got. It is a time to build the church. And when I say building the church, I am not talking about just an inward focus, like we're just going to build ourselves up and we'll all be happy together. Part of the church being built up means that we are outward focused on the world and what is happening. We're not just thinking about ourselves. For the church to be built means for the church to become outward focused. And what does God want to do? And of course, it's not like the mission has changed one bit. We're called to preach the gospel and gather people to Jesus. And it's a time. Listen, there is a battle going on. I'm going to do a separate video on this. There is an intense battle going on in our nation and in much of the world, obviously. And it's a time to stand up and fight. And we don't fight with carnal weapons. Paul says in Ephesians that our sword, which is the weapon, he says it's the word of God, which is the gospel of Christ. And but then Paul goes on and says, listen, he doesn't say it exactly this way, I'm kind of summarizing, but he says, if you're going to wield that sword effectively, then you're going to have to be praying all the time in the Spirit. And so this is the time for us to rise up and use the sword, the word of God, to speak truth and to confront some of the things that are happening. And I'll do more of that myself as well. And we need to be praying. We need to be praying all the time in the Spirit. And because it's through prayer that we connect with heaven. And it's through prayer that we receive anointing and grace and power and strength and strategy and insight and then we just stay close to the heart of God and we partner with heaven. Listen, it's not like Jesus just left and said, okay, here, go do it. No, he's the one in charge and he's the one who's actively at work on the earth, and we need to partner with him. And we partner with him both in prayer in terms of our communion and our relationship and our dependence upon him, and then we also partner with him by taking action and taking those steps and preaching and teaching and loving and being kind and doing all of these things from that place of communion and relationship with the Lord. Time to rise up. It's time to build the church. Don't let what is going on distract you from what is most important this time. Love you guys, and I'll be sharing more as we go on, and bless you.